Energy and the Silicon Valley Community Choice. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining our business webinar on Community Choice Energy and the Silicon Valley Community Choice Energy Partnership. Glad to have you with us. My name is Don Bray, and I'm with Joint Venture Silicon Valley. I'll be serving as our moderator for the webinar today. The purpose of this session is to provide you with an update on the prospective formation of a community choice entity here in Silicon Valley. This is a big and impactful concept, and there's been a tremendous amount of activity on this locally over the past several months, and some major milestones looming on the immediate horizon, and we want to bring you up to speed on that. And we also want to continue to educate local energy stakeholders on what community choice is, starting with the basics of how it works and what's in it for local customers in the community. This webinar is focused particularly on engaging commercial energy customers, and we know that many of you are from large organizations with sophisticated energy demands, so we're going to go into a little more detail than we might with a more general audience. Before we get to the presentations, I'll share a couple of important context slides. At the highest level, community choice is in effect a hybrid utility model. A traditional investor-owned utility, as diagrammed on the left, is responsible for generating or purchasing power, maintaining transmission and distribution lines, and providing customer service and billing functions. And on the right, in a municipal or public utility model, a city department is responsible for the same full range of functions: procurement, distribution, and service. Locally, as you probably know, the cities of Palo Alto and Santa Clara both operate municipal utilities. With community choice, as shown in the middle, a new public entity is formed that assumes responsibility for power procurement, while the investor utility, PG&E in our case, continues to manage distribution and customer service. In this model, the community choice entity decides what types of power generation to utilize and procure, what new power offerings to make available to customers, and at what prices. And this is what you'll ultimately see on the generation portion of your power bill. We'll talk more about the details of how this works and why there's so much local interest in it, but at the highest level, this is the overall community choice concept. And locally, business customers are a big piece of the equation. In the service area being studied by the Silicon Valley Partnership, business customers are nearly 2/3, or 64% of the bundled electric load. And that's after factoring out large commercial and industrial direct access customers who buy their power directly. So it's really important, as you can see, that we inform and engage business stakeholders in this process. We have some excellent presentations and presenters lined up for you today. I'm joined by Melody Tovar and Sean Marshall. Melody is the project team lead for the Silicon Valley Partnership. She serves as the Regulatory Programs Division Manager with the City of Sunnyvale. She has an extensive background in environmental program management and engineering with over 20 years at the cities of San Jose and Sunnyvale. Melody will take us through the formation efforts behind the Silicon Valley Partnership, current activities, and critical upcoming milestones. And Sean is a widely recognized expert in community choice energy. As a Mill Valley council member and mayor, she was instrumental in the formation of Marin Clean Energy. MCE went live in 2010 as the first community choice entity in California, and subsequently, Sean founded and leads the Local Energy Aggregation Network, or LEAN as the acronym is known. They're a nonprofit that serves community choice entities around the country with resources and expertise. LEAN currently serves as a consultant to the Silicon Valley Partnership on program development and formation efforts, and she's going to provide us with a primer on community choice, including the details of how and where it's operating around California and what it means to commercial customers. I'll also quickly introduce Allison Elliott with LEAN. Allison is at the webinar controls and will be helping us to route participant questions as they come in from you. You all are in listen-only mode, and questions can be submitted via the question box on your screen. We'll be keeping an eye on those as we go, and if the question is brief in nature, we'll attempt to cover it in the stream of the presentation. Otherwise, we'll queue it up for a Q&A topic later on in the webinar. Our agenda today looks like this. We'll hear from Melody and Sean, and then move through some commonly asked questions, as well as questions from you in the audience. We'll close with a discussion of immediate next steps and other resources that are available. And with that, I will turn it over to our first presenter, Melody Tovar.
Thank you, Don, and welcome everyone. So Don gave a good introduction to what community choice energy is, but I think particularly for folks who are new to it, it's worth repeating. This is a graphic we show with all of our audiences to clearly show that what community choice energy is a program where local cities in the county pool the electricity demand of the residents and businesses within their jurisdiction and then go out and buy power for them. It's kind of like buying in bulk. The local program buys electricity from various sources, and in doing so gets to choose the power mix it procures on behalf of the community. PG&E, as you see here, is still responsible for delivery, and they remain an essential partner. While the program buys the electricity, it all goes to the grid distribution system. PG&E continues to own and maintain that distribution system that delivers to customers the energy the program purchases. They also continue to provide billing and customer service. So that's the hybrid that Don talked about. Local communities are looking at this because we all have greenhouse gas reduction goals inspired by the state and spurred by its leadership, but also inspired by the interest to take a leadership role in taking actions that help protect our climate and position our communities well for the future. Many communities have specific climate action plans and specific target reductions. More and more, those communities are including community choice energy as a key strategy within those plans. And here's why. Pretty consistently, when you look at a community's greenhouse gas contributing sources, you'll find that transportation and electricity account for the largest pieces of the pie, shown here on the right. Here in the Valley, about 1/3 of the greenhouse gas emissions are estimated to come from how we use electricity and how we source it. How we get places and how we power our lives are the two largest sources of greenhouse gas emissions for our communities. So transforming how electricity is sourced and expanding the use of renewable, low-emission sources is essential in achieving meaningful reductions in greenhouse gas emissions. Large companies, many here in our area, have similar motivations and have taken big steps to advancing the redirection of electricity generation to greener sources. Here is a list of local companies identified as members of the EPA Green Power Partnership, and you see familiar names. These companies are aggregating their electricity demand and buying or building greener power. A community choice energy program does much the same thing, but for a diverse set of customers, an entire community, instead of just an individual business. Here in Silicon Valley, Sunnyvale City Council first directed that we conduct an evaluation of the potential for a regional program and to find out who else might be interested. A partnership emerged in 2014 quickly with Sunnyvale, Cupertino, Mountain View, and the county. These 4 agencies are sponsoring the current initiative, including today's webinar. We also had 8 additional communities here in the Valley accept our invitation to participate in this initiative, and we'll talk more about their role later. There are a lot of potential benefits to implementing this kind of program. Through our discussions with the various communities, we've identified these 5 as our top priority goals. As we've mentioned, we want to offer renewable energy supply options. In this case, not just a single option when you pay your bill, but really giving you the power to be as green as you want to be, and always exceeding the renewable content that's currently offered by the investor-owned utility, or PG&E. Fundamentally, our goal is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in support of our local climate initiatives. And fundamentally, we know that we need to be providing to our customers a competitive, potentially lower electricity rate in order for this to be an attractive proposition. Here in the Valley, known for its innovation, we also recognize the important overlap and interrelationship with clean technology. And so we want to facilitate the use of clean technology, local clean power, and other energy innovations through a community choice program. And since we are creating a public agency to administer this, we have to keep in mind, and we excitedly do so, that this has got to be a well-managed and financially sustainable agency in order for this to be a real benefit to our community. I mentioned that we started as 4 and now we're 12. And so we began last year as 4 communities and recognized quickly that there's a workload to doing this. There's an investment to be made up front. And that investment is not necessarily scalable exactly with how many people do it. And so there is a more the merrier concept going on here. When we look at our electricity usage here and aggregate the 12 communities that are potentially participating in a program, we total 4 million megawatt hours total in electricity. And that is after you exclude what Dawn talked about as the direct access customers. So this is all of our bundled energy customers that we would envision enrolling into a program. The 4 sponsoring agencies are the mother lode of the load. They are the 68%. But the other 8 listed here collectively create another 32%, or a half, a 50% increase in the program with their participation in such a program. And so we're now moving forward with the idea that all 12 would be offered the opportunity to participate. This is a detailed timeline, so we will not go through this point by point, but we wanted to give you the context that right now we're in a due diligence and study phase. And so up at the top, we are here. We are in the second part of what we've called phase 1. We did complete an initial assessment, and it was completed by Sean Marshall. She'll talk about the findings from that here shortly. And we're now amidst a very detailed technical feasibility study that really looks at the local load from these 12 communities, the program goals that we would want to advance, and looks at market conditions to identify whether those things are compatible for a program that would meet all of our objectives. We're also moving forward with community outreach and input. Today is an example of that. Here along the bottom you see the timeline. We expect the results of that technical study to come in the fall. It will be in November. By the end of November, we'll be looking at a draft here shortly as a team. And after that, the communities get to decide whether they want to form a Joint Powers Authority agency to actually implement a program. That JPA, a new agency, would have representation from all of the participating communities and then set forth the set of activities needed to really launch a program. Those showing here in phase 2 are things like going out on the market and getting energy services pricing through a procurement process, and also building program elements such that you have a complete implementation plan that is required to be submitted to the California PUC, the agency that would oversee the formation of such an agency. Remember, PG&E is still a partner in this program, and so there are behind-the-scenes agreements that need to be done to support the operations, including one specifically with the investor-owned utility. And then there's also dealing with the fundamental operations of staffing and financing and contracted services in order to get ready for launch. For us, our target would be that we would be submitting an implementation plan sometime in spring of 2016. And then, if everything is favorable, we're moving into phase 3, which is really preparing for active launch. Again, setting up an organization, finalizing contracts, letting customers know about their program options, and actually beginning to conceptualize, if not implement, local programming beyond just the electricity provision. And our goal right now is that we would be launching a community choice program here in Silicon Valley in winter of 2016/17.
All right, thank you, Melody. And now we're going to move to Sean Marshall, who's going to take us through a primer on community choice and what it means specifically for commercial energy customers. Sean?
Okay, super. Good morning, everybody. And I want to acknowledge Melody. You did a super job with that, and so I will be sure that I don't repeat here, but want to just appreciate everybody who is on the webinar this morning. My remarks are going to just start off backing up a little bit to provide some much greater national context to let you know that the community choice energy concept is not new in the United States. It actually started in the state of Massachusetts in the late 1990s and then slowly moved its way west. AB 117 was passed in the California Assembly in 2002. And the most recent addition to the CCA family is the state of New York that is just launching its first program in Westchester County and then moving on up into Sullivan and other counties. So we also see great interest from the states of Utah, Delaware, and Minnesota. And I imagine that this program, if it continues to show the kind of performance metrics that it has, we should see it popping up here in the next decade, perhaps across the country. The history here in California, forgive us, there is a numeric error there, but AB 117 was authorized in 2002 in California, and then importantly was amended and expanded in 2011 by SB 790. SB 790 had a lot of administrative and technical fixes to the original statute, but the most important component of that piece of legislation is that there is now a utility code of conduct in the state of California that basically says that none of the investor-owned utilities are permitted to actively and publicly market against a CCE program in the state. There are a couple of other good fixes, but that was important because we had tremendous pushback from PG&E when Marin County went to launch its program in 2009 and 2010. And the statute is written to require the full cooperation of the utilities around the state. And I will say that to their credit since then, the utilities have actually been quite cooperative and are neutral on the subject. So as you can see here, we have 3 operational CCE programs in the state: Marin County, Sonoma County, and now the city of Lancaster in Los Angeles County. And then also several others under investigation and in process around the state. And this is just an illustrative slide to show you that there are now about 20 or so counties representing hundreds of cities, primarily coastal so far, but now we are beginning to see a real push inland and up into the northeast part of the state. So this just gives you an idea that there's going to be a lot of activity prospected here in the next 3 to 5 years in terms of program launch, which is exciting news. This is just a quick summary of some of the state requirements of CCA service, and that is, this is true here in Silicon Valley as well, that local governments will participate in the CCE program by passing an ordinance and joining a joint powers agency. That is under formation as we speak, and as Melody mentioned, likely to take shape and launch in the spring of 2016 so that the program then can follow in the winter of 16-17. The utility, as mentioned, continues to provide consolidated billing, customer service, and power line and grid maintenance. So that is the separation of functions whereby the CCA takes care of the supply side of the equation, the electricity power procurement, and the utility stays in the traditional role of taking care of the pole and wire infrastructure and billing the customers. The program will become the default electricity provider for the Santa Clara Valley. Customers will receive a minimum of 4 opt-out notices, that's during our enrollment period, over 120 days. It is likely that customers in this region will receive perhaps as many as 5. And there are several ways that customers are given to opt out of the program if they so choose. You can do it in writing. They can go to a website. There will also be a 1-800 number call center. So it's very easy for customers to navigate their way around the program and decide what they want to do. Also very important to note that customers can return to bundled PG&E service at any time they so choose. New CCA entities must register with the California Public Utilities Commission. It starts with the submission of an implementation plan, which is similar, if you will, to a business plan, lays out the framework of the program and what will transpire. It's also important to note that the CPUC continues to have a limited oversight and regulatory role because, as we said before, the CCA program is in partnership with the utility, and so there are several places where the PUC maintains oversight. The service agreement with PG&E is what codifies the partnership and the operating relationship between the program and the utility. The good news here is that there are currently 2 service agreements in place with in PG&E territory, and so we have lessons learned, and those service agreements are going pretty smoothly. How is the program operated and governed? As mentioned before, there will be a joint powers agency that is formed sometime in the spring or early summer of 2016 with multiple municipal members. Unknown yet how many of that group of cities that Melody showed prior, how many will actually join, although it's looking very positive right now. The key functions of the agency include power procurement and possibly development of clean power supplies going forward, rate design and rate setting, legal and regulatory compliance, the creation of ancillary energy programs, so those might be things like energy efficiency, demand response, electric vehicle programs, and things like that. And then also customer engagement. So there's lots of customers that have questions about their bill or what programs are available to them, and so there's usually a team of account managers for each CCA program. The JPA agreement that is in creation in draft form right now specifies the terms of municipal membership. The governance in the Santa Clara Valley is proposed as one elected representative from each member jurisdiction, plus an alternate representative that does not necessarily have to be an elected official. It is proposed that the board will meet monthly in a public setting. The board sets the JPA policy, approves the procurement strategy typically on an annual basis, approves the large power contract, sets the rates typically annually, and provides organizational oversight. This is quite similar to the way a municipal utility is currently run. You know, for example, in Palo Alto or here the Silicon Valley Power Authority, it's quite similar to the oversight structure in those entities. Importantly, the CCA program will hire a staff that is uniquely qualified to perform all of the various functions articulated above. How is community choice energy visible to customers? So the top left there, you've seen another version of the illustration that basically is the outline of what the program is. And then, as mentioned before, PG&E will continue to send the bills to all customers. So we like to call this program the biggest change you'll never notice, because while the percentage of green power that is going on the wires is changing dramatically, the customer relationship, the customer experience of that doesn't really change at all, because you will continue to pay your bill directly to PG&E. They maintain the lines and all as mentioned. Two things worth noting here. This is a copy of the Sonoma Clean Power Bill. You'll see that they have their generation charges. And then on the flip side of this bill, which is not shown here, there is something called the PCIA, otherwise known as the Power Charge Indifference Adjustment, otherwise known as the exit fee. And what that is an annual vintaged fee to pay the utility for the cost of stranded assets, stranded power that would have already been procured on the customer's behalf. And so that PCIA gets, quote unquote, baked into the overall rate charged by the CCE to make sure that we can still be competitive, but it does show up as part of the customer's bill. Here is an overview of the product offerings that are offered currently in the three existing community choice programs. You will see that Marin and Sonoma are quite similar in terms of, actually all three are offering a default product that ranges from 35% to 50% renewable. All three are offering a voluntary 100% green power option. And then Marin, just this last year, launched a community solar project up in Novato that is, they're calling Soul Shares, that is 100% local solar offered at a price premium. All of the 100% renewable products are offered at a price premium for those customers that really want to go the extra mile and double down on their green attributes. Customer offerings are sourced to meet specific goals. So what you see here is a comparison between PG&E's supply portfolio and that of Sonoma Clean Power. These are 2014 numbers. And what you see here that's really dramatically different from one of the others is that PG&E has a fair amount of nuclear and natural gas in their power portfolio, where both Marin and Sonoma have no nuclear in their power portfolio. They do not contract for natural gas. There is, however, the category, the gray there, called unspecified, and that is what we call California system power. There are modest amounts of nuclear power in the system power, and that is predominantly natural gas. So this just gives you an example of the different sources that feed the grid on behalf of the utility and then Sonoma Clean Power. Here you can see the carbon reduction metrics and significant reductions realized by Sonoma Clean Power just in their first year of operation. So what you see there is PG&E's CO2 emissions are 427 pounds per megawatt hour. Within 6 months of launch, Sonoma Clean Power, with their default product, had reduced that number by on the order of 25%, and their evergreen product, we're checking this. I think the reason that that's a 70 pounds per megawatt hour and not 0 is that there are some unbundled RECs in that mix, only 3%. But we're double checking that number. The point of this slide is that you can see pretty dramatic greenhouse gas reductions very quickly after program launch. This gives you an idea of the current 2015 generation rate comparison, and for those of you on the webinar who are coming from large industrial complexes or industrial parks, you can see there the generation rate comparison that is actually quite favorable to the gen rates charged by PG&E. In Marin, even their 100% large commercial customers are beating PG&E's gen rates. And in Sonoma, their default product is significantly lower. Their 100% clean product is slightly higher, as you see there. So this just gives you an idea, and we expect that these kinds of margins will continue going forward. Unknown yet, though, for Santa Clara Valley what those numbers will be, but typically we see very favorable rates with commercial customers. This is another way of expressing the Sonoma Clean Power rate comparison. The difference here is that these total numbers bake in the cost of that exit fee that I mentioned earlier, as well as an average of 3.5% for administrative overhead. So that rate that you see there is inclusive of all of those additional fees charged to the customers. And you can see that it's still quite competitive with PG&E's commercial rate. And this is for an A1 commercial customer. Here you can see this is still Sonoma. Here you can see the E19 example for those of you who have the large CNI. Again, quite competitive on rates. This slide here just is a prompt to share with you some real-time stories around the other innovative opportunities that exist as a result of the CCE program. So what we see in both Marin and Sonoma right now are some significant solar developments on formerly brownfield sites. Right now, Marin is in development for a 10.5 megawatt project at the Richmond refinery. This is a win-win for Chevron, who donated the land upon which that solar field sits, and it's a public-private partnership with a solar company taking the tax credits, and then that project will shift ownership to become part of MCE's long-term fleet. Energy efficiency is a significant component of Marin's program. Sonoma Clean Power is still working on theirs. Marin has been able to unleash upwards of $5 million from the CPUC and then leverage it with the state funding, and is currently has a proposal to serve as the central point of contact for all of the energy efficiency activities through their service territory. And that's commercial, residential, and all service categories. On the upper right there, the photovoltaics project that you see, this is similar to a 12 megawatt project that the Sonoma County Water Agency has developed on their irrigation pond, and they have done a power purchase agreement with Sonoma Clean Power, and that project is going to start generating power, I believe, starting 2016 for SCP. So that's a real win-win local example of how new renewables are spurred on the local level. And then finally, battery storage. The example there is a partnership that Marin Clean Energy has with Tesla. Tesla is working with Marin on a preferred basis so that MCE customers, both residential and commercial, can access their battery wall on a preferred basis through the MCE program. And so that is a partnership ongoing with Tesla.
Sean, we've had a few questions coming in here about opt-out versus opt-in and how that works. Maybe you can just briefly clarify that, and we can come through it more in the Q&A period.
Okay,
but you
super.
take it quickly now.
Thank you. So the statute for community choice energy in the state of California is written as an opt-out law. That is actually common across the country. And what that means is that when a community or group of communities decides to get together and pass an ordinance, all customers are automatically enrolled in the program unless they choose to opt out. I should be very clear that the one exception to this rule are direct access customers. So if you are currently a DA customer, you will not be automatically enrolled. You will, however, have the choice going forward, if you choose to enroll in the CCA program, you would contact the governing body and very likely could become a customer. So that's the way that it works.
And the notifications.
And yes, just to remind that there are multiple notifications during the enrollment period. Those are typically mailers, and there's all kinds of ways to opt out. And the reason that you do this is to generate enough scale in order to viably run a program that otherwise, if past as prologue, has been trouble reaching scale when you have any kind of voluntary program. So if that doesn't answer your question, please let us know and we'll pick it up at the end. Next slide. Why now? The timing for CCE formation is good in the state of California. Why? Because wholesale power and natural gas prices are at historic lows. The technical studies that have been done and the tech study for the Silicon Valley will actually be out here, I believe, in another 3 weeks. What we've seen is that the price troughs are looking very favorable into the foreseeable future. There is no guarantee of that. This is why you need to hedge your power supply portfolio with diversified contracts, different terms, different lengths, etc. The other thing to keep in mind is that the current IOUs are fully resourced through 2020, that there is excess power available on the market, actually quite a lot of renewable power. Both Marin and Sonoma have received on the order of 3 and 4 times the number of power purchase agreements and opportunities than they have room for in their power supply portfolio. So we're seeing that there is supply available, and that the affordable financing is available for these JPA operations and credit requirements to become a counterparty on these PPA agreements. CCE's programs, Marin and Sonoma, are demonstrating sound fiscal performance. This is just an overview of their fiscal year 15-16 budgets. You can see that their revenues are quite healthy. Marin Clean Energy is going to be going up yet again. They are right in the middle of enrolling a number of new cities in the county of Napa, so that number is projected to expand. You can see that the cost of energy is the largest single expenditure, which is appropriate because that is the purpose of a CCE program. You can see that the administration is running between 3.5% and 4% for these programs, and that the projected net reserves for Marin are $4.5 million, for Sonoma 16. You might say, well, why is Sonoma so much more significant? 2 reasons. One, they were able to procure power contracts that were more favorable than they originally projected. They've had lower opt-outs than originally projected, so their revenues are up. And they have yet to do any of their ancillary energy efficiency or other programming that typically takes a percentage of that revenue and redirects it into new programs. So those are the three primary reasons why their number is larger. But the overall point here is that both programs are well managed and fiscally sound. There are risks to any new project or program that one embarks on. The good news here is that through the experience of Marin, Sonoma, and now Lancaster, many of these risks have been mitigated and continue to be mitigated. The financial risk generally is related to market risk, as well as rates and all of that. And so one of the mitigation strategies here is that you must make sure that your power portfolio, as I said before, is diversified, and that you hire the best and the brightest talent to make sure that you've got a great procurement team that knows what they're doing. Competitive and pricing risk, the risk here is that you have a rate spike that would result in higher than average opt-out rates. One of the mitigations that both Marin and Sonoma have done is to have a very healthy reserve account, and a portion of that account is for rate stabilization, which in essence would help level out any rate spikes and avoid high opt-out rates. Market exposure, as mentioned before, we have no guarantee on a good wholesale power market. As all of you know out there, or many of you do, things are volatile in the energy space. And so this is just something that we always keep an eye on, and your staff will monitor and work for you. Regulatory and political risk, they sometimes go hand in glove, Sacramento and the CPUC. The current CCE programs are involved in somewhere on the order of 15 to 16 regulatory proceedings. The CPUC, I will give them credit, they've come a long way since 2009, 2010. Things are getting better at the CPUC, but it's a place where we always have to pay attention to issues like cost shifting, cost allocation mechanism, and a number of other technical issues. And we are also very active in Sacramento, making sure that the CCE opportunity is well protected and advanced. So in summary, thank you for listening to me for so long. We're just going to review the value proposition, and then I'll turn the controls back over to Dawn and Melody to wrap us up here. Important to note, for those of you especially who are direct access customers, that CCE adds additional choices for you. It does not remove or take over your existing DA opportunities or contracts. It actually adds options because your accounts can all go to a single entity, or you can split it among DA, Community Choice, and PG&E if you so choose. You can do the mathematics on that and decide what's best for you. Community Choice programs established today should be able to compete on cost for the foreseeable future. This is part of what I referenced, and we'll have much more information about that in the upcoming technical study soon to be released. As noted, Community Choice provides cost-effective renewable energy development and significant reduction of Scope 2 GHG emissions. We have seen that CCE revenues can be leveraged to fund public-private partnerships, feed-in tariff projects, PEV infrastructure, demand response, energy conservation, battery storage. There's some exciting stuff happening, and the great news is that it's a very collaborative community, and lots of best practices are shared from CCE to CCE. And it's a great opportunity for local pilots and innovation. And I'll just remind you of the Tesla project. The Tesla partnership, I think, is one of these great examples where MCE customers are being able to access those power walls on a preferred basis, which is exciting for many customers that are into that. So I'll turn it over now and back to Dawn to finish this up. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Sean. At this point, we'll go into Q&A mode. We've teed up a number of commonly asked business questions on this page for starters, and we'll go through these sort of interleaved with questions from the audience. We want to encourage your questions. Please submit them in the question box that's accessible on the pull-down menu on your screen. It's likely we're not going to have all the answers here, but every question is really useful to us. Where questions relate to complex rates or fees or the applicability of some existing PG&E demand programs, those kinds of details, we may have to note those questions and get back to you. And in some cases, the exact answer may not be known until the actual CCE rate schedules are developed down the line. But with that caveat, we'll aim to provide the best directional answers we can here. From the audience, we have a question as it relates to the PCIA charge, and will this go down in subsequent years as the PCA, as contracts age out? If you want to tackle that one, Sean?
Sure. It is a great question, whoever asked it. Thank you very much. Logic on this says, yes, the PCIA should actually go down, and it should, frankly, disappear over a certain period of time as community choice contracts shift from the utility to the new program. Unfortunately, reality says not always. And in fact, what we are seeing proposed in 2016 is that the PCIA is actually going up significantly. And so one of the things that we're studying very closely is to make sure that the CCE program can still be price competitive with PG&E while acknowledging an increase in the PCIA as well as a decrease in gen rates in this coming year. So we're threading that needle right now. Part of the reason for this is one of the big issues at the CPUC right now, and we've had some previous, I would say, positive steps in the right direction on this PCIA calculation. One of the big issues is that it's a black box calculation, and so we need greater transparency with how those calculations are actually done and on what vintaging they're calculated upon. But the other critical issue is that the utility is still the provider of last resort, Polar. And for that reason, they can rightly claim that they need to continue to procure power even though the CCA program is procuring its own, because they remain in backup position, if you will, in perpetuity. Now, how much power they should attend to, for being the Polar is under question, and that really, I think, will lead to what that PCIA will be over time. So this is one of those where we have to just continue to fight the good fight, pay attention, but ostensibly, it should go down and it should actually disappear, and that is the goal.
Another question coming in here is about states that offer direct retail choice to electricity consumers, where they can go directly to a supplier and not through a CCA. How do you see that, Sean, in your travels around the country?
So there are a couple of states, what we call retail electric states, that are engaged in CCA. In those states, it's called municipal energy aggregation, same thing. And generally, CCA is a little bit tougher there, but the value propositions are also different in those states. So I'm gonna take us to the Midwest, and because both Ohio and Illinois are municipal aggregation is very popular in both of those states, but not for the same reasons that it's popular here in California. Primarily, it's a cost proposition, a rate proposition, where a municipal aggregation from a volumetric perspective can beat the utility on rates, but those are typically very short-term contracts. And so what we see is quite a lot of switching, almost either on an annual or biannual basis, where you have communities switching from a retail electric supplier and then maybe back to the utility and back and forth. It is not a long-term joint powers agency type structure, wholesale market. It's quite different from the California proposition. The other thing that we see is that very often the communities will go towards municipal aggregation because they want to provide a level of consumer protection, because what they were seeing was some of this door-to-door stuff going on where people were signing onto contracts that were actually deleterious and bad for them over the course of a year or two. So many of them have chosen it as a consumer protection and rate saving strategy, not so much greenhouse gas reductions and the other environmental attributes.
Okay, I will tackle some of the questions on the list here. Some of these are really summaries. Some are net new relative to what we've covered. What energy options are available to commercial energy customers? Again, in summary, a community choice entity typically develops a standard default energy mix offering that has a higher mix of renewables than the standard PG&E grid, and an opt-up 100% renewable power option. These same mix offerings are available to both residential and commercial customers, though the rate structures are different as they are today with residential and commercial rates. And over time, as Sean mentioned, it's possible that there will be additional business-specific programs developed in the area of demand response or energy storage, energy efficiency, and so forth. Would service reliability be affected? Really common question. No, reliability is not affected moving to community choice. Responsibility for service reliability remains with PG&E. PG&E, of course, continues to maintain the power distribution network under community choice. We covered this question on direct access customers. Direct access customers are not automatically enrolled. They can choose to enroll proactively if they want. And what do commercial rate schedules look like? Big question here. CCE's commercial rate schedules typically parallel PG&E rate schedules. For instance, the CCE would present an equivalent schedule for the various permutations of an A10 or an E19 rate schedule that are provided by the IOU. And this includes time of use or net energy metering rate schedules. What elements of the utility bill are affected or are not affected? CCE rate schedules describe generation-related charges only. The PG&E delivery charges remain the same. Demand charges, for instance, large energy customers are usually on rate schedules that have demand charges. These are complicated, as you know, and they're comprised of generation, distribution, and transmission related subcharges. And while demand charges are based on a peak kilowatt demand for a given period, the generation portion of the demand charge is actually set by the CCE, while the distribution and transmission portion of the demand charge remains with PG&E as it is on your current PG&E rate schedule. In terms of fees, fees largely remain the same, with the major exception of the PCIA, the Power Charge Indifference Adjustment that Sean talked about. It's a substantial fee, also called the exit fee, compensating the utility for stranded assets, and this varies year to year on the vintage concept that Sean described. We have some additional questions coming in from the audience. Based on the cost comparisons that we were shown, it looks like the programs for large users, say an E19, would run about 10% below PG. Well, it's actually
for the 100%.
Yeah, it depends what we're talking about, the 100% renewable or the default. But yes, maybe we can.
In Marin.
Maybe we can go back to that screen.
Sure.
Yeah, it's actually lower. I think we just.
This one here?
Yeah.
No.
Let's do this one right here.
Okay.
So looking at E19. So E19 shows, under this simulation, if you will, $35,000 in the monthly bill for Clean Start and $43,000 for 100% renewable versus $38,000 for PG&E. So rough math, 10%, 9 or 10% lower for the Clean Start default offer, approximately 10 to 15% higher for the 100% renewable.
Yeah. However, there's a caveat there because the reason for that higher 100% product in Sonoma is that that is sourced by their local geysers, and so they made a policy decision to keep it local, and thus the cost premium in Sonoma Clean Powers program is slightly higher than the cost premium in Marin. I'll back up here real quick and just show you, and granted we have to include the PCIA and some administrative costs, but as you can see in Marin, for the E19 rate, their 100% product is still significantly lower than PG&E's gen rate, even with, then if you go and add the rest on, it's still quite competitive. So just so you know, it will differ from program to program in terms of not only the rate structure, but the rates that are set. However, it's still anticipated that gen rates will be quite competitive at the commercial scale.
Okay, terrific. I'll go back to the questions here. In terms of...
there was another one that came in.
Okay, another one that came in. All right. See, just studying the question here. As CCEs grow and more load leaves and more stranded PG&E energy is on the grid, how will the PCIA go down? Will it be impacted by that? Sean, any take on that?
Yes. So the reason it will go down is that the CPUC pays attention to this issue through the annual long-term procurement proceeding. This is a proceeding every year where the utilities have to essentially submit their power procurement plan for the current year and then into the out years. And so, in essence, the reason that it will go down is that over time, and granted, it could be 10 years, it could be 20 in some cases, because PG&E, just like Marin Clean Energy or Sonoma, will have anywhere from 10 to 20 to 25-year contracts. So what you're doing is that you're basically running the clock, if you will, to run the clock out on those contracts. But the reason that it will go down over time is that they then do not need to enter into new power contracts on behalf of that departed load. And so it may take some time. But ultimately, for those programs that leave PG&E bundled service, the only power that you will be charged to PCIA for will be that polar provider of last resort backup power. That is sort of the long-term end game. Ultimately, we hope that the PCIA goes away entirely. It is not something that is common in other parts of the country, and so we're working on that presently. I hope that answers your questions.
Okay, just moving back to this list, we'll try and tackle one or two more in the time we have left. In terms of net energy metering, in general, if you have solar or other distributed generation on your site today, the net metering process will continue to function as it does today. And in the event that your account runs a surplus over the year, and this isn't that common, but in the event that it does, this often happens more in a residential context, the CCEs can determine the value of that surplus energy and the amount reimbursed back to the customer. And both Marin and Sonoma have been experimenting with some interesting feed-in tariff concepts for that scenario. How are rates set? Rates are set by CCE staff, as was shown, and are approved by the CCE governing board, again, representatives from the local cities, and rates are typically set yearly. And what steps are required to become a customer of a CCE entity? When the CCE is set to launch, bundled customer accounts will be automatically enrolled into the new CCE program, and they will be given at least 4 opt-out notifications to remain customers of PG&E if they so choose. And in Sonoma and Marin, the CCEs have worked very proactively with commercial customers that are interested in understanding the real rate impact of going to the CCE. In fact, I think SCP has a rate simulator on their website where you can see what the potential impact is up or down of their different energy offerings relative to each other and to PG&E. And this is something that really was important as the CCEs went live, particularly with large energy customers where there's substantial questions about cost.
Can I add something there?
Sure.
I would just encourage all of you, especially those of you who are in that E19, and even, I don't know if we have any ag business folks on the line, but that when the Silicon Valley program goes live in that 2017, early 2017 timeframe, and even before then, it might be helpful to just meet with the principals to crunch some numbers and see what's possible for you. Not necessarily now because we're in early days, but it's definitely going to be worth, I think, looking at a comparison between your performance with PG&E, your potential performance with the CCE, and potentially your performance with direct access if you are a direct access customer. That just really underscores the future choice that you will have.
Great. We'll move to Melody for a wrap-up and discussion on next steps.
Great. Thank you, Don, and thank you, Sean, so much always for your insight and your expertise in this arena. It has been a real learning lesson for us here as a project team. We want to give a flavor of where we are with respect to our next steps. We are moving actively on 3 parallel tracks right now. We've talked about the technical study, stakeholder engagement, and the agency formation, or that interagency collaboration that needs to happen in order to launch a real program. Specific to the technical study, we thought we would give you a preview of the specific scenarios that we are using in the study itself. The purpose of the study, again, is to identify whether the market is favorable to the particular program objectives we have and the particular load here in Silicon Valley. For the 12 communities, again, we identified that it's about 4 million megawatt hours in total energy usage. For comparison, that's about as big as the Sonoma and Marin programs collectively. But if you want to think about what distinguishes us here in this area, is that we do have a larger commercial load, folks like yourselves. And so while we have a comparable load to those collectively together, we have fewer customer accounts, for example, because we have bigger accounts. So the 3 scenarios that we're using are intended to bookend what's possible and then identify some Midland scenario that likely proves closer to where we would actually land with respect to program development. Our first scenario, and again, all of these are always trying to turn the 3 fundamental dials for us of greenhouse gas emission reduction, specifically renewable portfolio standard meeting and exceeding within that, so the generation of renewable sources, and cost management and rate containment. So the first scenario is matching PG&E's GHG-free content and starting at 35% renewable portfolio for the content. And so that's beating them on the renewable portfolio component, but at least matching them with respect to their emissions coefficients. The mid area is exceeding them both on content for GHG and for renewable portfolio in the mix. And so we start at a 50% renewable portfolio and then escalate to 75% by 2030. As many of you know, SB 350 recently passed and is intended to target everyone to a 50% renewable portfolio standard by 2030. Our program projects how we might exceed that for the long term as well, going to 75. And all the time ensuring that our greenhouse gas emission coefficients remain at least 20% below that of what's projected to be achieved by the investor-owned utility. On the extreme end of it, we took the tact of what would be the greenest thing we could do and still achieve rate parity with PG&E. And so the first 2 scenarios are expected to achieve some rate savings, while the third one is really intended to completely minimize that in order to afford us the greatest green benefit. And so we'll maximize the GHG-free content, maximize the renewable content, and still achieve rate parity in that third scenario. With all 3 of these, we gave the consultants some underlying assumptions that they need to figure into their work. One is that they would all have a 100% renewable voluntary program, similar to what you saw in both Marin, Sonoma, and now Lancaster. So everyone has some version of a deep green in these programs. And then maybe getting lots of detail here, but we talked about what kinds of content and the use of things like unbundled recs and things like that very briefly. In all scenarios, we directed the consultant to assume that the program would use only what are called Category 1 and Category 2 energy sources. And those are both bundled content sources. Category 1 is typically in-state, Category 2 typically out-of-state. And there are some policy as well as cost considerations in how you try to balance those two. So that's a preview, and again, we'll let you know that the technical study is expected to be released late November, early December at the very latest. The other big piece of this is decision making. So to give you a flavor for how the various communities will move forward with making final decisions for their communities, remember we have 12 partners, and so each of those partners needs to take very specific action in order to be a part of an ultimate program. One is they need to adopt a community choice energy ordinance. That's a formal declaration required by law that they are joining a community choice program. They also need to join on as part of the JPA, and so there will be an approval of a final agreement, and each agency must pass a resolution to join that JPA. And then lastly, we do envision that the launch costs associated with this program would be shared amongst the participating communities. And so we are working now on detailed estimates for what it will take to launch this program, and a proposal to our partner communities on how we might share that cost through the launch. For timing, our target is that all of the communities will take action by March 31st of 2016, and by action that means technically both a first and second reading of their ordinance in addition to the other 2 approved actions, such that we can launch a JPA with its first meeting to be held in April of 2016. In order to support our communities making those decisions, we are preparing a prep packet that includes what they would need to do the 3 required actions, to provide that to them by December 9th of this year, so that they are ready to roll for action in time for March 31. And then lastly, we just wanted to remind you of the community engagement approach that we're using. We are doing community meetings. We've done 6. We'll do at least 6 more between January and December, or December and January. In addition to those community meetings, which is really intended to be quite introductory, we recognize that we have some stakeholders who either have a broader interest, they represent others who may have a stake in this, or they have a deeper interest. They've simply been engaged in the topic for quite a while. This initiative was launched in part because of local community interest and some inspired advocates who have a rich knowledge already and are very interested in the details of how we proceed. And then you'll see here the list of business engagement. You guys are our target audience today. We do welcome you to go to the website for future updates as well as to submit additional comments. And we'll be holding a follow-up forum later in December.
All right, thank you, Melody, and thank you all for joining us today. If you have additional questions or feedback to provide, please send it to us via the Contact Us button on the svcleanenergy.org website. We hope this webinar has been useful to you, both as an update on the current status of the Silicon Valley CCE partnership and educational in terms of describing what the CCE is about. We've certainly covered a lot of details here today. We really appreciate your interest, and we look forward to having you involved on an ongoing basis in our business outreach and engagement activities going forward. Thanks again, and goodbye for now.
If they have questions, Dawn, who should they contact?
They can direct questions again through the Contact Us button on the svcleanenergy.org website. If you have questions for any of the 3 of us, specific to us, you can name us. Otherwise, your general question will be responded to on that via that channel. So again, thank you, and goodbye for now.
All right. Have a great day, everybody.